Welcome to the November Dementia Dialogue. My name is Brian Brown and I will be the moderator of this month's program, Meaningful Connections for People with Advanced Dementia. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing in the questions into the question pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. We are unable to take live questions from those of you exclusively on the phone. However, we have provided contact information at the end of the presentation that you can use if you have concerns that need to be addressed. As a reminder, we will not be able to answer person-specific medical questions, so try and keep your questions general. It is my pleasure to introduce to you our speakers for today's session. Jan Doherty is a nurse expert in dementia care and former director of the Banner Alzheimer's Institute Family and Community Services Program. On the topic of advanced dementia, Jan is known for her pioneering work in palliative care for advanced dementia and hospice care for dementia. I'd like to welcome Jan as our presenter.
Thank you, Brian, and welcome to our participants on this webinar. You know, this is a topic that is particularly near and dear to my heart, having spent a number of years working directly with people with advanced dementia and their families. And this is a time in the illness when not only is the person kind of struggling to be present, but when family and friends really question the presence of that person and really begin to wonder, do their visits really matter? And so I hope this webinar will kind of help debunk some of those misconceptions that many people have about the idea that people with advanced dementia aren't present, have very little to offer. And through this, it's really through these meaningful connections that we are able to honor the spirit of the person with advanced dementia. So in this next hour, I will be talking about, first of all, kind of what is advanced dementia. So I want to review that, and I will tell you that the October webinar was very in-depth about advanced dementia. So if you are interested more on that topic, I'd encourage you to go back and take a look at that. We're going to talk about this idea of comfort as being the goal of meaningful connections, and we can't make those connections, in fact, if it's not comfortable for that person. We're going to talk a lot about the use of the senses to enhance connections as we interact with people who are having more difficulty, and talk about how simplistic some of these measures are in making these important connections. And finally, we're going to talk about the importance of how to really assess and evaluate these interactions and figure out how do we change them if need be to promote quality of life and meaning for these individuals. So I'd like to start by just reviewing kind of what are the features of someone who is in the advanced stage of their illness. And I'll tell you that this is also referred to for people with Alzheimer's disease as late-stage Alzheimer's disease, but there are a lot of non-Alzheimer's dementias, and oftentimes we're saying at this point they have severe dementia or maybe even end-stage dementia. But I'm going to use the word advanced dementia really to describe these characteristics. And so, in fact, we see now that these individuals, despite the type of illness that they've had, will have severe memory loss. So not only is there short-term memory loss, but long-term memories are gone. So their ability to look at you, recognize you by name and relationship is really going to be challenged. In fact, they're only oriented to themselves, meaning that if you call that person by name, that they will look at you. They often have real significant changes in language, both in understanding what's being said, but also in their ability to make speech. So There's a lot of variation, I find, in people with advanced dementia with language abilities, and some individuals will have limited language abilities. Some maybe will make nonsense speech, meaning that words will kind of combine together. And some individuals will essentially be mute. But we're going to, again, see much variability. We'll see over this kind of 1 to 3 years of advanced dementia that individuals need a lot more assistance for walking. It's more difficult going from sitting to standing because people are moving less, and coordination of feet and that movement is more difficult. And subsequently, many will lose the ability to walk. We often see kind of a correlate as people lose that ability to walk. There are more difficulties with chewing and swallowing, and that's often a precursor to us to be thinking about hospice care. So these are individuals that need care for all aspects of their daily life, including assistance with kind of toileting needs that will leave them incontinent. So despite these changes, people still have needs, and they have significant needs that I think is important for us to recognize, and that is they have a need to make their needs known. They desire to be stimulated, and they have a need to continue to make connections. So let's explore that. So as we said, one of the needs is to make their needs known. And because of that, we often see what we call behavioral expressions. When you can no longer communicate needs, it's your behaviors that will communicate those needs. And so those of us who have spent time in this area of advanced dementia really rely on comfort as our guide, that if the person is uncomfortable, we're going to see these behaviors come through. Again, these expressions of an unmet need. And it's important to think that, again, these are individuals who have the same needs for emotional, physical, and spiritual needs. But again, the way they experience them, these needs, the way they express them is really quite different. So we want to think about these emotional needs, that people still need to feel safe and loved, that they want to be free from anxiety, depression, or overwhelm. They have physical needs just like you and I. They hunger, they thirst, they need to be toileted. They're sensitive to very cold temperatures, if it's too noisy, if they're tired, if we're moving them and they have discomfort or pain, we're going to see these behavioral expressions. And finally, they also have spiritual needs, whether it's the need to feel connected to the universe or to the divine. And our goal, using comfort as our guide, is to identify whatever that unmet need might be, and then better yet, learn to anticipate and meet that need before the need ever arises. So we need to think about strategies that will aid us in meeting the unmet needs of a person with advanced dementia. If you tune in to our webinars or you read our Beacon information routinely, you're going to see this as a reoccurring need, and that is the need for routines. Routines, in fact, provide comfort for all of us throughout our lives, and when time and spatial relationships don't make sense, a comfort strategy is just a predictable routine and what that looks like and feels like. Again, we talked about these behavioral expressions that we often label as behaviors, difficult behaviors, when in fact they're trying to express an unmet need. So we learn to understand what that looks like for that person and to try to anticipate and meet that need before the need ever arises. We also learn to watch for pain or other sources of discomfort that might be showing after we've met basic needs. So if in fact we know that the person is well rested, we know that their brief is not soiled, we know that they've just had a meal and they're satisfied, that they're have been engaged in something that's meaningful, maybe just a pleasant and quiet conversation with a caregiver who's feeding them, that if we see discomfort in any way, that perhaps they could have pain or something else taking place. We also know that we use other forms of distraction, and we're going to talk about these as ways to engage the person as well. But I often think about treating pain in a person that we just don't give Tylenol and go away, that in fact maybe use of light massage to a tender joint, or perhaps saying a prayer or putting on music that draws them into that experience can also aid in meeting that unmet need. So it's very important, as comfort is our guide, that we also think about our approach as we're entering into the world of a person with advanced dementia, where there is tremendous confusion and where often kind of the world beyond the end of their nose creates tremendous chaos and confusion. So while language abilities are changing quite dramatically in advanced dementia, we know that nonverbal abilities, in fact, remain intact. Along with that, we know that over 90% of communication is, in fact, nonverbal language. So as we look at these two ladies here in the picture, we show communication that is clearly very comfortable, very warm, and very positive. As we see smiles, we see a warm demeanor. I would sense that the woman in pink is obviously talking in a very pleasant and soft manner, probably talking slower to an individual who is having more difficulty even understanding, and avoiding questions like saying to her, "Do you know who I am?" when we understand that the person with advanced dementia has significant long-term memory issues, rather than by saying, "Hi, Mary, it's Sue. I'm here to take you outside." Again, we're appealing to that person's emotion because we want to let them know that we're a safe person and we're there to keep them safe. And always we're very flexible in accomplishing the tasks that we're focused on. And I think that's particularly an important concept for paid caregivers, particularly in residential settings when there's so many people who have needs and there's such an emphasis put on tasks being completed. Again, this would be a very important concept to be factoring into this soft approach. So we also said that, again, people have a need to have their needs met, but they have a need to be stimulated and to connect with others. And in fact, they want to connect to the world and those around them, and this is where they need our assistance. And we do this because, one, it promotes what we call their personhood, the essence of who they are, that their lives matter and continue to matter. And it's done in a way that's not only dignified, but really adds to the quality of their life. So some key concepts for us to keep in mind as we connect with individuals is that most of these connections are done through the form of activities, and that all activities matter and that they should have purpose and meaning. We want to utilize the senses, and we're going to talk about some unique sensory connections that can be utilized. We want to promote these activities and connections that really reflect the person's unique and lifelong preferences. And we're always balancing these stimulating activities with those that are much more calming. So if a person is already overstimulated, the last thing we want to do is draw them into a stimulating activity. Rather, we're thinking about what can be a sensory calming kind of activity that we might now use to engage that person and improve their quality of life. So some general guidelines before we engage in people in a more purposeful manner. We want to think through these concepts. So the first is, we always consider the best time of the day for the person. So I think that's particularly important whether the person's living at home or whether they're in a residential care setting. So let's talk about residential care. If they've moved into a residential care setting and we know that the mornings are difficult, then the staff there need to really share with the family that, you know, 3 o'clock in the afternoon tends to be when I see that your dad is much more alert, that he tends to engage more, that he says a few words so that you're not showing up at 10 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock at night and now you've missed this window to really connect with your dad in a meaningful way. Likewise, it's important for caregivers to think about at home, when is that best time of day to feed someone, to provide personal care, let alone to engage them in something more pleasant. So always think through best time of the day, and that's really throughout the illness. We also want to ensure that the basic needs have been met, because if the person's hungry or if they're wet, they're not going to be able to attend to the connection. Or if in fact they're incredibly fatigued and now we want them to participate in a small group, they just don't have the capacity to be present. We always want to call that person by name. Remember, they're oriented to self, but we have to now call them by that name. Hi, Bill. It's Jan, and I'm here now to take you to the group, or it's time for us to get you cleaned up for the day. Whatever that's going to be, we want to let them know who we are and what it is we intend to do. But we also want to provide time. So if I walk into Bill's room and I call him by name and say, hey, it's Jan, and I'm taking you to the dining room, and I immediately start getting you out of bed, Bill, in fact, might be resistant because he didn't even have time to process what I was saying. So it's really important that kind of we slow our whole approach, give Bill time to kind of be present with me before I take my next steps. Again, part of that is because I'm watching for Bill's reaction. I'm looking to see, did he get it? Because if he's resistant, he's clearly giving me some behavioral expressions that are saying, hey, wait, stop. I'm not okay with what you're about to do. So again, we're always looking for especially negative reactions or discomfort. It tells us, hey, slow down or stop altogether until we can neutralize that, and then let's start over. Again, also as we're making connections, we want to think about the amount of time that is involved in these connections, knowing that people with advanced dementia will fatigue much quicker. So 10 or 15 minutes might be enough. Again, it's not so much the time that matters as the quality of the time that's being spent. So I think that too is a very important concept for people to think through, whether you're a family caregiver, a friend, or even a paid caregiver. It's not quantity, rather, it's really all about the quality. So let's talk about kind of what are those opportunities that we have to create these meaningful connections. So what are just some of the individual connections that can be made? And often it's these individual connections that are probably the best or maybe the most robust. And simply that one-on-one is much easier when your attention is really minimized to just keep your attention on a single person. So I want to talk about activities of daily living, these self-care kind of activities which now are being done by a family or a paid caregiver. And these really do promote opportunities for connection or for engagement. So while giving a bath and obviously using comfort strategies where perhaps it's more of a bath being given in bed, or if in the shower the person is kept covered at all times so that they're not needlessly cold, it's an opportunity for us to create more pleasure and connection, whether we add some aromatherapy, whether we add some music, or even maybe providing a pleasurable snack, keeping that person comfortable. When we think even about feeding someone, when we think about eating, in fact, that's one of the most pleasant times that people share together. As we look at Thanksgiving just here coming up next week, that meal time is so important. Not only is the food good, but we can share wonderful conversation. And again, I have said these are folks who can't often add a lot or perhaps don't even understand all that's being said, but just by the tone of our voice and the interest we show in them can make it much more meaningful. I have a dear friend whose mother was on hospice care for advanced dementia, and I'm reminded of the wonderful CNA that came out from hospice care who said to my friend, you know, I draw such strength every morning that I get to come and give your mother a bath. She just gives to me so much that it fills my spirit for the day. And it really showed to me, again, how this CNA really got the importance of connection, that this was more than a bath. It was more than getting her clean. It was about providing to the quality of her life. So I'm going to encourage particularly paid caregivers to think about these as really unique times for connecting with that person. And then there's these vanity activities. I mean, we all like to look good and feel good, and so having hair and nails and makeup be part of that person's life is really important. Again, I think of a gentleman who takes his wife out every week from a residential setting to get her hair and nails done. Now, it's offered within the community that she lives in, but it also is a reminder and keeps her engaged with others who really care about her. We're going to talk more about music, but certainly music provides a wonderful medium for us to connect, as does food, the importance of massage, and I'm going to talk about touch, as well as spiritual and religious practices, which we'll also discuss in greater detail. Small group activities, though, can work for some individuals with advanced dementia, and so we don't want to rule those out altogether. And this is where I think about how can we organize these small groups, and now this is obviously more in a residential setting, but where people can come together who maybe share like interests or who might be able to do something meaningful as a group. Often these can be kind of vanity groups, so maybe it's a nail care, but it can be a musical group, it could be even a movement group, or even some limited sort of artwork that could be done. So there are a lot of opportunities for kind of these small groups as we think about connecting the right folks. And typically we're only talking 3 or 4 people in a small group. In some of the residential settings I've had the privilege to work with, I see what I call these normalization activities where people can come together, and I think about things like bread baking and the sensory experience from not only touching dough, but also smelling it as it rises and then baking. I think about tea time and how important that can be, and even a social hour. In fact, this summer I had the privilege of visiting a care community in Scotland, and they had a pub, and within the pub people gathered in the late afternoon for a social hour, including people with advanced dementia. Now, they did have a little bit of the nippy, but some people had non-alcoholic beverages or had juice, and it was really more about the socialization and using the mug or using the wine glass that created a meaningful connection and ritual with others. So the use of the senses just provides a wonderful opportunity as we try to connect with individuals. And the reality is there are these sensory memory pathways also within the brain that tap into remaining abilities. And we know often that use of more than one sense will actually help enhance or synergize that connection. So what we're trying to do is promote awareness of that individual, that self, as well as understanding that they're part of a surrounding, and in that surrounding is you, particularly you as a family member if you're visiting, and so using the senses can draw upon that. So we want to utilize senses, again, thinking about these lifelong preferences, interests, and habits that we all have throughout our lifetime. So let's start out with visual connections. And, you know, I love the expression that a picture's worth 1,000 words, particularly in individuals where language starts to fail them. And so there's nothing more profound than a beautiful image, again, whether that be the picture of mountains or whatever kind of geographical image that creates meaning to you, or perhaps it's looking at the image of a child or a newborn, or perhaps it's looking at images of animals that are found to be beautiful. Again, this is where these lifelong preferences come. Perhaps it's the image of a beautiful golf course. So you as family members often know that and can present these beautiful images. You could share a story or a memory based on an image. And so I have a picture of this book called The Sunshine on My Face. So this author, Lydia Burdick, is a daughter who cared for her mother who had advanced dementia and found it much more difficult to make connections. And so she created actually a series of books. This was her first, called The Sunshine on My Face, and it's illustrated with what I call the universal pleasures of eating warm apple pie or sitting under a comfort on a cold day or watching children play in the park. And it's really about showing these images and reading a statement and allowing the person to really participate in that meaning. And it's amazing how many, in fact, people with advanced dementia would start reading along with this book. So just a suggestion for you to look into. Again, often it's our voice tone or even the laughter. So I have the picture below of the kitty with the puffed cheeks. And I'm reminded of a program that was created at the University of Wisconsin called Time Slips that some of you might want to look at. And how do you tell a story behind what do you think that cat just ate? Does he have a mouse in his mouth? So even creating stories and showing familiar images and laughing about them can really engage, because people still have humor and people can still draw into your humor. And then there might be familiar programs, short programs. Often I think about I Love Lucy and some of the silly things that happened with she and Ethel that bring a familiarity because the person has seen it many times and can connect with that. So again, visual connections provide powerful meanings. Then I think about scented or smell connections. And yes, we know that there are changes in smell and taste as people age, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to stimulate them anyways. So we want to think about what are those favorite smell cues. And often when we think about it, it's things that are being baked or often fresh brewed coffee in a person who is a coffee drinker. There's a lot of work being done in the use of aromatherapy using essential oils, and there's all kinds of oils out there, and I'd encourage family and professional caregivers maybe to look more into aromatherapy as a means to providing connections. But lavender can be both a calming oil, often used more to promote a sense of calm, and sedation can help even folks with sleeping issues. And lemon and citrus might be a stimulating oil that you want to use when it is you want a person to be much more present. But then there's fresh cut flowers that just provide amazing aroma when we offer them to the person. So whatever that pleasant smell is, we want to gently introduce it to them, and we do that by just introducing it just under the nose, kind of moving that scent kind of back and forth, allowing the person to process what that is. And we're going to do it more than once. Oftentimes it's presented even 3 or 4 times, just very gently, allowing that person to become much more aware of the scent and to be able to connect with that. And then there's always my favorite, which is that taste connection. This is a reminder that food just remains an incredibly important and enjoyable part of life for people with advanced dementia. And in fact, when we use whole foods and we feed people carefully, we find often that they will eat almost up to a couple days before death occurs. But again, it's all now about the taste and the texture, and that there really is a preference for soft and sweet foods. And so ice cream or ice cream based kind of products often really seem to work. But as we're providing food, again, we're always watching for choking, and we're always allowing for enough time for the person to really enjoy what is put in front of them, and also looking at the amount of food so that we're not providing so much that it feels to be overwhelming. So many families, one of the great things they do is enjoy that taste connection. I remember seeing a gentleman who cared for his wife at home with advanced dementia, and she had been on our hospice service. And I saw him right following her death, and he said to me with such joy, you know, the last thing I gave to her was vanilla ice cream. And clearly this was something that he did and gave to her in love, and that she received in that gift in the way that it was given to her as a real treat. Touch connections. You know, part of our human need is to be touched. And I'm often reminded how clinical often care becomes as people get into the advanced stage, that we seem to only touch them when we're delivering care to them, when we're bathing them, when we're changing a brief, when we're maybe washing their hands and their face. And as humans, we need much more than that. And it's a reminder that we need to continue to touch people in a way that, though, is acceptable for them. So I do recognize and want to put out there that I know some people have never liked touch, and we want to respect that as well. But that's more really the exception than the rule. So giving hugs, having a gentle hand be on someone's shoulder, or just holding hands is an incredibly important thing to do, and can communicate so much without a word being exchanged. We think about using pleasant tactile cues. So it's so terrific that animal therapy is being recognized and being utilized, especially for people who've had an animal in the past and still enjoy the touch of a dog or a cat or a bunny, whatever that might be. And then I think about just pleasant touches that people have enjoyed. It could be velvet. It could be feeling sand and feeling sand in your toes. And so sometimes families will create memory boxes that are full of these tactile kind of objects that bring a familiarity, perhaps for men who like to work in the garage or work on projects, feeling hammers and screws, etc., just bring a sense of familiarity and a sense of self. And then there's these auditory or hearing connections that are certainly very important. You know, these sound cues just bring delight for us. When I think about going outside, particularly in the morning, and hearing the sounds of the birds, just lightens my soul. And remember that these are sounds that are heard throughout lifetime and very well entrenched into long-term memory. So these sounds of nature and children's voices and songs can just really feel this person's spirit, and this is a wonderful way to honor them. We know the area of music is just incredibly powerful, with lots of evidence on effectiveness. And so I have a picture of Lawrence Welk that reminds me of my work when we were doing our original work on palliative care and advanced dementia, actually then in a couple nursing homes. And it was interesting. I was working on a unit that was specifically designed for people with advanced dementia. And our local PBS station would play Lawrence Welk on Saturday evenings. And it was amazing how people who were sleeping, who were put in position of a television where they could actually see the TV and hear the TV, responded when we begin to wake up. And if they could not sing along, they would be tapping along. So we know that music is just incredibly powerful. But how we use it needs to be very purposeful. We want to focus the music on that person's favorite song, artist, and genre. So that can take some work if we're kind of the adult child of the person, but spouses often know what preferred music might be. We also want to look at that kind of category of songs, artists, and genre based on the person's age. So we want to look at the years between when the person was 18 to 25, that's the music that's really well entrenched. This is music that, again, we heard that was meaningful as we graduated high school, went off to the military, got married, went to college, got our first job, had our first baby, fell in love. All those kinds of things get associated with these sorts of songs. By the way, families can Google top songs based on year, and that can be a really great guide, especially for adult children or grandchildren, maybe now with the holidays coming up, who want to put a playlist together. So we want to find those favorite songs or artists, and we want to, again, create a CD or a downloaded list that we can play with the person, not just for, but with. So we really want to engage this person then into the music. So typically we want to dose the music just like we dose a drug. So we find that when music's played in the background, in fact we all habituate to it, is what we call, where we just, it becomes white noise. So if we want to use the music as part of this sensory visit, we want to use it in a very purposeful way. So typically about 15 to 30 minutes is enough. I would tell you, in addition to playing the music, moving to the music or singing to the music is far more powerful. So your ability as a family member or even a paid staff to sing along with that person or to start singing and allow them to join you is really incredible. Many of us don't even need to have perhaps a CD playing, that we might be able to just sing something, "You Are My Sunshine," or "Let Me Call You Sweetheart," "How Much Is That Dog in the Window," or maybe a religious song that the person has sung throughout life. What we would encourage you to do is just slow down the tempo, again sing a bit slower, and really focus on the chorus rather than the verse, because in fact that's what most of us tend to do or remember as we sing along with oldies but goodies. So again, this auditory connection is also a very important one. Then I think about movement connections, or what we call kinesthetic connections. Again, getting that body to move, because one of the things we don't want to see happen is see bodies get contractions, meaning that the muscles, tendons become so tight from disuse. So we often think about these kind of physical activities that also allow for connections. So if any of us have ever walked into a residential setting and we've seen a balloon or a beach ball toss, we might look at that to be somewhat infantile. But in fact, there's a purpose for that, and again, it's that response, it's that movement of getting in touch with the surrounding in which one might be living. Likewise, blowing or catching bubbles can be another way to catch attention and can be actually quite a wonderful, engaging, and calming activities, as perhaps you as the caregiver blow the bubbles and the person kind of watches them goes by or even reaches out to try and pick one up or pop one or catch one. We can do simple range of motion, again moving that body part, and a perfect time to do that is during a bathing activity, and we do it in a very gentle way. If we know the person though has pain, I would say it's really important that they be adequately treated for pain before we would range that particular joint that might be painful. Going for an outdoor walk, now the person might not be walking, but just being brought to the outdoors, especially now here in the Phoenix areas, we're finally having these cooler temperatures to experience maybe beautiful flowers that are being grown in a pot, to experience a garden, to be listening to those beautiful sounds or witnessing just the crisp, cool air of the morning. We've talked about movement to music. And then I think about just interaction with children and animals. When they come into our lives, how it is we often will reach out and want to respond to them. So bringing grandchildren in for visits is very much encouraged. But remember, best time of the day and limiting the amount of time so that we don't overwhelm this person, as children do what they're supposed to do, which is to make a lot of ruckus. And so we want to just be mindful, again, of those principles, but a very powerful way to create connections. So there's a way to combine all these connections together, and we did some incredible work in this through these multisensory connections, because again, if we get two or more of these senses working together, we're more likely to connect at a higher level and see a more profound response. And so here's an example of an activity of a day in the ballpark. So let's kind of walk through what that might look like. And you could create a variety of kind of activities where no, the person couldn't have been in the Cubs game, or maybe if they were a Cubs fan and forgot that they just won the World Series. But in fact, we might begin with the smell cueing by maybe cutting some grass that's available to us and just gently putting it under that person's nose. Again, we've entered their world. Bill, it's Jan. I want you to smell this grass, and just slowly introducing the grass kind of under the person's nose. And by the way, I would know that Bill was not allergic to grass. I wanted to say that for any naysayers. Then I might introduce a Chicago Cubs cap, because I know that Bill was a Chicago Cubs fan. And I say, Bill, look at this cap. And maybe I'm talking to him a little bit about the Chicago Cubs and Wrigley Field, or whatever that might be. Perhaps now I introduce a kinesthetic or a movement activity where I take a baseball and I place it into Bill's hands. And I allow him to touch it and feel it, and then I take his hands in mine and I start slowly moving his hands and his arms back and forth, again, bringing greater awareness to the surroundings in which he's in. With a touch sense, I put a glove in Bill's hand and allow him to put that glove into his hand, and probably we'll soon see Bill taking his fist and punching it into the glove. With a hearing clue, I start singing Take Me Out to the Ball Game. And I sing it more than once because I want Bill to join along, and soon he will be joining me. And if he's not singing along, most likely I'm going to see him tapping along. And because I want to celebrate this wonderful time now we've spent together, probably over the course of, I don't know, 5 to 10 minutes, there's going to be a taste celebration. If Bill's able to take a bite of a hot dog, maybe we're going to celebrate with that. Maybe it's going to be a cup of lemonade, and that's what we enjoy together. But it's a way to use these connections that provides meaning for Bill and also for me as his daughter. There's also religious rituals and relics that can provide amazing connections. And I have to say, in working with people with advanced dementia, in addition to music and chocolate, religious practices that were well rehearsed by that person often really made some of the most profound connections. So whether it be celebrating the sacraments, whether it be someone holding a prayer shawl, whether it be familiar scripture or verses that are being recited, those kinds of things can provide a very unique connection for the person. And again, as I say, if you can end your sensory connections with some sort of treat, a piece of Hershey's chocolate is often very nice. It's just a way to celebrate spending time together. So after we've provided this connection, we want to evaluate kind of how did it work? Was it pleasant for that person? Did they respond to us? And it could be that they just held our eyes. Perhaps there were some vocalizations. Perhaps there were some words spoken. Maybe the person laughed. Maybe they were reflective in a way that we understand at a deeper level. We want to learn those things because we want to be able to share what works. Again, if the person's living in a residential setting and you've had this kind of interaction, you might ask staff to let you know following your visit, were they alert longer? Were they more responsive? Did they eat more? Did they participate more? Did they seem happier? I call that kind of the carryover effect. Because you might leave them and maybe they didn't remember the visit that they've had, but they have this feeling of well-being, of being happy and content that can stay with them for a longer period of time. And I think that really is important to reinforce the benefit of the connections that we continue to work with this individual. Obviously, families, if you know things that are working with your loved one, it's really imperative to share it with others. You know, yesterday I was providing a training, and a caregiver was there whose mother is now in the advanced stages of the disease, and she was very distraught that most all of the grandchildren have stopped visiting. And I shared with her that a lot of it is, one, they don't understand, but they probably find it very awkward to make visits with her. And how is it that you can share what you've learned? Because clearly you're still making visits that count and that matter, and you're seeing your mom in a way that perhaps they can't. So sharing these kinds of tips and tools, and here's what really matters, and this is how long. All you need is a 10-minute visit at this time of the day, and I tend to put in this, maybe it's a Lawrence Welk video, and we watch it together, and I move his hands to the music, or she and I hug, whatever that is, providing that, and we end our time together with a chocolate chip cookie. Those are important things to share with others. Likewise, families, if you move your person into a residential setting, don't make them guess what it is that works. It's really important that you share with them the kinds of connections and activities that you found really work for that individual, so they have the ability to draw upon them as well. Well, in summary, I hope you see that it is really possible to not only make connections, but maintain these meaningful connections with individuals who have advanced dementia. And I think when we think about incorporating these comfort strategies and approaches, and we should make sure that they're comfortable during their best time of day, and we use these rituals, routines, lifelong practices that create kind of these sensory experiences, that we can make connections, and life is enhanced not only for the person with dementia, but it's also enhanced for us as families and as staff who really want to make a difference in the life of a person with advanced dementia. So with that, I would be open to additional questions that some of our participants might have, and I thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jan. And there are several questions that have come in. First question, are there any behavioral challenges such as combativeness that arise with somebody with advanced dementia?
You know, that's a great question, Brian, and it's often one of the behaviors that's most reported not only by families but by paid caregivers as well. So I want us to come back to this idea of behavioral expression. So if people are combative, we should be understanding that whatever we're doing is clearly making that person feel unsafe or threatened, because when we strike out, we're telling them stop. So we're feeling in some way that someone's trying to invade our space. We often see a lot of these quote-unquote combative behavioral expressions around personal care being given. So here you are undressing me and I don't know who you are, or you're trying to change my brief and you're reaching into a very vulnerable place in my body and I don't understand why. Or perhaps you're trying to brush my teeth with a lethal object that I no longer understand. So it's really important to, again, come back to these approach strategies to start by introducing yourself and what it is you intend to do, to establish a sense of safety, to move slowly, and to provide a lot of distractions and diversion. So I'm not going to like you changing my brief, for example, and providing pericare, but if you pop a piece of Hershey's chocolate into my mouth and you talk to me about a topic that I really like, my dog, for example, I'm distracted enough to focus on the positive stimuli being the topic of my dog and the chocolate in my mouth to divert the fact that perhaps you're trying to change my brief and give me pericare. By the way, I would tell people to look in our beacon listing online at banneralz.org, and we've written a beacon called Bathing Without a Battle, and that I think will address a lot of these combative behaviors that often caregivers encounter.
Excellent. Another listener has asked about, you mentioned animal therapy. What do you know about doll therapy?
Yeah, so doll therapy certainly tends to be kind of written much more about in the literature over in the United Kingdom. And it's the idea that dolls provide a benefit, serving as a surrogate child, if you will, for a person with dementia. You know, I've seen it go in multiple directions. So if we have a person who just really loves children and identify self as those young motherhood years, accept the doll as being her child, it can provide tremendous comfort and tremendous purpose and meaning for the person. On the other hand, I've seen it cause distress. So just like any other person with dementia, you know, what works for one won't work for another. So I would say, yes, look at it as an opportunity for meaning for the person, but it certainly is not a one-size-fits-all. Likewise with animals, some people respond very positively to an animal being introduced and not so much. So it's a very similar thing. So it can provide meaning for those, and it can be tremendously helpful, and it can be not so helpful too. So again, that evaluation of what works and what doesn't work is really important.
Okay. Another question, are there anything that we can specifically do to become more skilled in nonverbal communication?
Boy, that's a great question. Well, first of all, I would say just to be aware of our expressions is really important. Often when I work with family caregivers who are expressing a lot of the challenges that they're having, sometimes what I'll do is I'll say, imagine I'm holding up a mirror. What am I looking at now when I look at you? Because sometimes we're not aware of how our body language, our facial expressions, and how our voice tone gets communicated, especially when we're fatigued, when we're stressed, when we're upset. And these are often common emotions when we're involved in caregiving because, look, it's a very difficult job. And when caregivers aren't taking care of themselves, and often family caregivers aren't taking care of themselves, these are normal reactions. So perhaps we need to begin to reflect and think in that soft approach, am I smiling? Is my voice tone pleasant? Am I talking in a soft, non-rushed way? Because that's often a really good place to begin, is just to kind of imagine holding up a mirror and thinking, what is it I'm about to look at?
That's great advice. Another question from one of our listeners. The facility that my mom is in uses red plates because red apparently makes vegetables look more appetizing. Have you heard of that or other eating enhancements?
Yeah, so interesting question, and yes, there's actually been some research done on the color of plates or the color placemat, actually a red placemat with a white plate. Again, it just differentiates, things stand out. The red plate works often with food just because the food stands out, provides more contrast, particularly if there's mashed potatoes, or I think about vegetables usually being green. So it's not that it's more appetizing, actually, it's more that the person's able to see it and able to differentiate it and then maybe desire it. So there's a lot of strategies around eating, and remember, I'm going to tell you that eating remains one of the most important activities in the life of a person with advanced dementia right to the end. So for me, the eating experience should really be a pleasant one. This is one where I think about putting on some music that is to the person's preference. This is where we want the caregiver sitting next or across to the person. We're finding people with advanced dementia often need to be fed. If they're able to use their fingers, then I want to make sure that we're providing soft finger foods for them to feed themselves. But there's also a lot of research that shows that by touching the person throughout the meal that they're likely to eat about a third more, which is significant for these folks who aren't eating quite as much. And I also want to make sure that whatever is going into their mouth is incredibly delicious, that they want it, that they accept it, that I'm not forcing them maybe to eat a pureed diet that they don't find palatable. We should not be doctoring up food by adding sugar or syrup. I'm really into the whole foods and have done extensive work in this area to see that people receive food that is whole food, that is the right taste and texture. For a lot of people with advanced dementia, again, that's going to be more pureed type food, more yogurt-based, applesauce texture and consistency. But a really important part of life and an important celebration that families can use. And don't forget the chocolate. It works.
Jan, I would like to thank you very much for the very informative presentation you gave. And in closing, I'd like to remind everybody that this session is recorded and will be available on our website. You can listen to it again or share it with others. An evaluation will be emailed to you, and we thank you for taking the time to give us feedback. Also like to remind you that next month, please join us on December 16th as Susie Favaro discusses Finding Myself Beyond My Role as Caregiver. Once again, I'd like to thank you very much for joining our Dementia Dialogues, where we strive to bring you the best in dementia education. Thank you very much.